Okay.
Got it.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Birmingham Trades Union Council, I'd like to welcome you all to the second instalment of a conference on the Black History Month. We have three distinguished speakers tonight: Joshua Kelly, Mohammed Idrish, and Ken Makaria. Okay. And we'll commence first of all with Joshua Kelly, who works for Diane Abbott, but Joshua tonight will be speaking to us in his personal capacity. Okay. Joshua.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your lovely introduction. And you can all hear me, correct? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. All right, thank you. And it's wonderful to join such a fantastic panel on such an important event. So I've been invited here tonight on Zoom to talk to you about Windrush, the scandal, and the current process by which, how the scandal is progressing, what are the demands for the Windrush generation moving forward. So I'd like to start with the good news from a parliamentary perspective. And the good news is that politically, it seems that it's largely uncontested that the Windrush generation were indeed wronged by the Home Office and by the British state. It's accepted across the House that that is the case. That is the logic that underlines the Windrush compensation scheme, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I think it's important to start on that positive note and to highlight that this is an important victory for campaigners who struggled for a long time for recognition and for this issue to be brought into the political sphere. The fact that it's widely recognised that the Windrush generation were wronged is indeed allows us to move on to questions of compensation for the Windrush generation, where unfortunately the battle now takes place and where the political debate is as it stands now. The bad news is that compensation for the Windrush generation is not being delivered. The scheme has and continues to fail the Windrush generation. It does so in a number of ways and for a number of reasons that I'm going to go through now. After about just 2 years, it's estimated about £14 million has been paid out. And if that sounds like a lot, just remember that estimates suggested that between 120 and 300 plus million would be paid out because of this scheme. So by some metrics, we are about 10th, perhaps even less, of what should be paid out has in fact being paid out. And these delays, the cruelty of these delays is amplified by the nature of the Windrush generation. Older people and whose insecure status may have been resolved now that this scandal is being addressed, but for which they've lost jobs, many have lost homes, they've spent long periods being incarcerated and so on. And these delays have cost them money. They have damaged their mental health and in some cases their physical health. And I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that they will cost lives or they have cost lives. I know from personal experience that in our office and other MPs' offices, we'll have received calls from members of the Windrush generation who are distraught because they cannot access that compensation. Some have lost businesses because years of not being with status has affected them and their ability to work and get jobs or run their own businesses. So the delays to the Windrush scheme are the forefront of the struggles facing the Windrush generation, among others. So if we delve deeper into the delays into which about why the Windrush compensation scheme is not paying out, we see a number of factors that could, or I would argue do, cause this. The first is simply an administrative one. It's the fact that this scheme is delivered by the Home Office. I'm sure other speakers will kind of touch on this on this point, but the Home Office, even when it wants to, has a poor track record of delivering. It works slow. It's slow. It doesn't talk to itself. It has a poor track record of delivering on its commitments and on what it should be doing. And some case of this, I believe, is just the fact that it is poorly administratively run. But another case is certainly ideological. I think for the Home Office, the Windrush generation falls into an undeserving, even if it's not spoken out loud, an undeserving category. For the Home Office, these are low priority cases, and I think it will remain that way unless there is drastic change. And I'm going to talk more about that. But also, I think there's a lack of support being given to claimants who should be given compensation because of this scheme. And this is doubly impactful because of the nature of the Windrush generation. We're talking about elderly claimants. Many of them are ill or disabled. They'll struggle with digital literacy and accessing services online. And they might require medical treatment that takes up large portions of their time. And the way that the system currently works or doesn't work is quite labor intensive, I think, to try and get things from the Home Office. I'm sure other speakers will mention this before, but you can't just send one email to the Home Office with your documents and then expect it just to work. Even if the Home Office accepts your position, they will drag their feet, especially when it comes to paying out money or giving status. So the fact that this process is largely digital and to some degree in an age of COVID, that's understandable, but these do predate COVID as well. So it's clearly not just that. I think the big fear from campaigners is that this kind of constructive maladministration serves a political end as well. I think there is fear amongst campaigners, which is justified, that the Home Office perhaps thinks that they can get away with not paying a lot of this money in the hope that the Windrush generation either give up or sadly pass or simply are unable to access their compensation under the scheme. The other thing I want to talk about was how we can change this, and this is kind of what I'm going to finish on. Apologies, I'm not sure how long I've been speaking for, but what MPs can do. Firstly, I think data recording is extremely important. We know some of these statistics, like the one I read about how much compensation is being held because campaigners are constantly looking through these and finding this information either through parliamentary channels or freedom of information journalistic channels. And I think it's really important that we keep this up. I know there's a big thing for my boss, Diane Abbott, that we use data and that we ensure that we collect all the data that we can, which really helps to build the case, especially with regards to the Windrush generation. So data recording is extremely important. And I think MPs and journalists, especially, big shout out to the journalists that have been on this campaign. That's really important. The other thing is, of course, casework. When Windrush claimants contact their MP, it's really important that they have an MP that listens to them, understands what they need, and will proactively work for them. The Home Office does respond in some way to MP casework. They are obliged to some degree to be accountable to individual MPs, and it's really important that MPs, are taking that casework, that they are recognizing that, they need to do a lot of heavy lifting for what are a generation that, are, like I said, are elderly and maybe suffering from ill health or disability. There's also the select committees, and I know Diane's on the Home Affairs Select Committee and has done work on this, and her colleague in Hackney South has done work on the Public Accounts Committee as well, Meg Hillier, to really kind of put the government's feet to the fire over the nature of the scheme and the failures of the scheme and not letting them off the hook. And this is extremely important. And it's important that campaigners ensure that MPs don't feel that that's no longer an issue and that they no longer have to pursue that. In terms of political demand, what can we do to fix this. It's a big mountain, but I think we should take heart, like I said at the start, of the past successes. You know, past successes from campaigners have ensured that politically, like I said at the start, it's uncontested that with the Windrush generation were wronged in mainstream political discourse. So it's really important that we continue with that pressure. Demands, firstly, the Home Office itself. I'm sure other speakers will get onto this, but the Home Office needs radical reform. We all know this on a number of issues, from refugees to all sorts of issues like this. We know the Home Office is simply incapable of doing its casework in a timely fashion. And I'm sure other speakers will go into that into more detail, but also demands from campaigners on demanding that the scheme is separated from the Home Office. These are valuable, and I think these political demands are something that we really should pursue. If we judge, and I think we should judge, that the Home Office is incapable of dealing with these cases, then demanding that the Windrush compensation scheme is hired by a separate body is set up for it, might go some way to improving the process. But of course, the backbone of what the demands are needed is solidarity and community support. Windrush generation claimants know this, and they have and continue to rely on their families and their communities. You know, they need that support from their family members, even if it's just as small as helping them send an email, or whether it's financial support whilst they can't work and they haven't had their compensation. So yeah, just to sum up those political demands, the requirement for solidarity and community support, as well as demanding better from the Windrush compensation scheme, including taking it away from the Home Office, because it really is ill-suited to delivering this scheme, and also the continued need for the Home Office to really undergo a radical change. I'm just going to end there. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Ian. Thank you all. Ian, there you go.
If you can all unmute, please, as I've done, and give a big round of applause, please, to Joshua for his excellent contribution. Okay. There'll be opportunity for questions and answers afterwards. Okay. Now, our second speaker is Mohammed Idris of the Birmingham Anti-Deportation Campaign. Okay, Mohammed.
Thank you for asking me to speak on the Black History Month. I felt a bit funny, actually, when I was asked to speak on Black History Month. I thought it was only 40 years ago when I was fighting the campaign, and I have now feel that I have become part of the history. Hope it is not history. Unfortunately, it is not history, because suffering for Black people, as the previous speaker has mentioned, in recent days, and many more other Black people suffers under this same immigration law, which has penalized many people and brought sufferings to many people. In that respect, I'll say that respect to those people who are still fighting, because fighting that's what we must do, and we can do. It is within our power, and we must do it. It was back, as I say, 40 years ago, actually 44, 46 years ago, 1976. I came in this country as a student, studied, socialized, I fell in love, and got married, and applied to stay in this country. And that was the beginning of my love and hate relationship with the Home Office and British immigration authorities. I got married in 79, and I applied for leave to remain in this country. I was interviewed in the immigration office. It's like old style. Some of you might be old enough to remember the television program called Mr. and Mrs. He used to take the Mr. in one room to ask a lot of questions about like what toothbrush your wife use, and then take the Mrs. in another room and ask the same question and see that the two answers match. And then you used to win a prize. And my prize was live to remain in this country if I could answer all this question correctly. We are interviewed once at the airport. We are interviewed twice in our home. I was interviewed again at the airport. Nothing was wrong and no decision was made. It took them 2.5 years waiting for, I suppose they were waiting for something to go wrong. We had problem in our marriage at the end of 1982. This time, they took 2 weeks to make a decision and they refused me leave to remain in this country. I and my wife was separated and they asked me to leave this country within 2 weeks. It was bad enough to have a broken relationship, but it was worse that I was only given 2 weeks to leave this country. I did not think it was right. That's simply because my marriage has broken down and I should leave this country. So I wanted to fight. I was a lot younger in those days. I had a sense of right and wrong, and I thought it was wrong. I wanted to fight. So I invited my friends, my colleagues, my neighbors to join me in a fight against my deportation. They did. It didn't take very long for people to realize that I was not the only one who was facing deportation. In those days, on an average, 250 people deported from this country. People clearly saw it as an act of racism because immigration law did not affect white people. If you're a white person, either a European or an Australian or Canadian, American, one way or another, you are exempted from British immigration control in those days. But if you're a black person, you didn't have any exemption. So if you fall foul, you leave this country or they throw you out of this country. And this was under the new Immigration Act. Prior to this time, up until 1973, under the old Commonwealth Immigration Act, you could not deport anybody. You might not be allowed to live in this country. And that's precisely where the Windrush generation came, because they all came before 1973. They did not need to do anything because they were part of the Commonwealth. If they lived in this country as an ordinary citizen for 3 years or 5 years, then they automatically got leave to remain in this country. And many people who came from Jamaica, came from West Indian Island, they came to live here and, they never went back. So they never actually, I have seen people who had not even renewed their first passport, the passport they came in from Jamaica. They had never renewed it because they did not need to. They were not planning to go back. And they had no stamp. They did not do anything. They didn't seek any advice because the law in those days was such that if you are an old Commonwealth citizen, then you can live in this country. Anyway, that's a different story. We'll go into a debate about that later on. Joshua has put it very eloquently. Now, 1983, by the time I received the deportation order in my hand, it was 1983. And if you're not old enough to know it, you must have read in history. It was Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher's year, the most right-wing, I don't know, up to that point, it was the most right-wing Tory government. I mean, other government has surpassed it, but it was second term, she won the election. It was tough time, you know. The miners' strike was just around the corner, and a lot of you know about what happened to miners since then. So where do we go? But a lot of people who are involved in political activities, trade union activities, people still hope that they can change. People still thought that if they fight, they can change. We appeal to them that, you know, as an individual, even the whole of Black community together, we're not big enough to challenge and change the institution of government and the law in this country. We need help from the comrades and fellow travelers. So we decided that we will ask my trade union for support. My branch supported me, and branch sent me to the annual conference of the trade union. It was called NALGO in those days. It doesn't exist anymore. It has amalgamated with NUP and COSI and become Unison. And I think Naim, you are sitting in front of one of the Unison placard. The same motion in the annual conference of 1983, and they sent me as a delegate. I arrived there in Isle of Man in 1983, NALGO annual conference. That was another battle. In those days, trade union did not think that fighting against deportation was a trade union issue. They did not think fighting racism was a trade union issue. I was confronted by the, what you call top table, the leadership of the union. And I was plainly told that pay and condition of workers is the business of trade union. Fighting deportation and fighting immigration law is not their business. And I said, hold on a second, how could it not be business? What good is it to me that you get me a 5% pay rise and my condition of service is extremely good? If they manage to deport me in Bangladesh, where is my job and where is my condition of services? And I'm a trade unionist, I got every right to ask your support. I managed against their wish, against their opposition. I managed to gather enough delegates to support the motion. It needed 2/3 majority of the conference delegates. And because that's one thing about trade union, I suppose it still exists, because the leadership of the union was opposing this motion. So the membership decided they will give a slap on their face. So when the chair was proudly declaring that this motion needs 2/3 majority, because he said standing order 3 motion, meaning it's an emergency motion. It did not come through proper channel. And In fact, I think they gave more than 2/3 majority, so more. It was more like 3/4 majority voted for it, and nobody voted against it. Once it was passed, it became a national policy. Life became a little easier. It was not possible for me or little campaign based in Birmingham, supported by 20 odd Labour Party activists, to take this campaign nationwide. It was possible because NALGO nationally decided to support the campaign. It made it possible for me to be invited into NALGO branch meetings all over the country. I went in the south, I went as far as Plymouth. On the north, I went as far as Aberdeen. It was good for my individual campaign. It was also good because some of the branches I went, little branches in a little town in England and Scotland, that people did not know that British immigration law discriminates against Black people. People in Scotland used to think that it's an English law. If simply I moved into Scotland, they would not be able to deport me. That was the level of understanding about Immigration Act. But so, because of a national trade union supporting me, it was possible for me and through me for other people to raise the issue of racism that is practiced within within the immigration law. Now, there are two little things I must mention because it is a Trades Council meeting. How was it possible against all the opposition from the leadership of the campaign? It was possible because the two factors there. One was in those days, the Communist Party of Great Britain was still active, and they had a very good grassroots organization within the trade union movement, and they're very knowledgeable, active, and supportive of issues, and they knew the rule book. They knew the trade union rule book, and they could manipulate it. Second thing, it was possible because if you remember, I remember because you work for Joshua, you work for Dan about Barney, what was his name? Barney. Anyway,
Bernie
Barney
Grant.
Grant. You're right. Yeah, Barney Grant. Well, they were fighting in Labour Party for the Black section. That was the year 1983, and in many trade unions, Black activists were fighting for Black section as well. They called it Black self-organization with the trade union, and they were opposed by the trade union leadership. But because a large number of Black members were present in the conference room, and they were willing to shout slogans in front of the delegates, Mohammed Idris must, deportation, no way. So these two factors, the knowledge of the Communist Party members and their solid support, and the Black delegates present, actually won the day for me on the conference floor. Second thing was, the national campaign was fine. I was going all over the country, but the level of support in Birmingham was very important. You might be surprised to hear that in those days, Trades Council or Trade Union Council used to have a monthly meeting, and which used to attract between 100 to 150 delegates on a Wednesday night in the Transport and General Workers Office in Broad Street. I think they have since sold that building. And we also had Trade Union Resource Center, TARC. We had an office in Frederick Street. And the TARC used to be supported by Birmingham City Council. Those things will sound strange, that a city council was supporting Trade Union Resource Center, and Trades Council used to attract something like 200 people on a monthly meeting. And I used to be regular speaker and delegate in the Trades Council meeting. And all our leaflet, they did video, they did all sorts of other publicity thing through Trade Union Resource Center. I must remember, with respect, name of Roger Klein. He used to be the head of the Trade Union Resource Center, and the Trades Council. For a long time, the chairperson was Paul Matney. And of course, Nalgo office in Birmingham, who used to be based in City Centre Tower. Sid Platt used to be the district organizer, and up to 15 people, full-time workers who works in the office. They all they dedicated their time to Mohammed Idris campaign. I used to be regularly invited into Transport and General Workers branch meetings, National Union of Teachers branch meeting, NATFE, new amalgamated. But thing is, a lot of trade union branches took active interest and actively participated in the campaign. It was possible to grow big. In 1984, when the National Union of Mine Workers went on a strike, I'm sure you heard about it. Some of them, you might have seen some of it. That was the first time we had a real face-to-face contact between manual trade union activists and Black people. Because Birmingham Trades Council adopted Staffordshire miners, and they used to regularly come to Birmingham, and we used to provide accommodation for trade unionists from Staffordshire, the miners from Staffordshire. And it was, it started very, very cold type of relationship, because being a white miners, they didn't know what to expect from a group of Asian and Black people in Handsworth. Neither did we know how they will react to our treatment, but in a year-long fight, we became very good comrades. And that's how a relationship was formed between the trade unions and the Black communities fight. And soon after that, you probably heard of 1985 uprising. Although it was primarily started with Black people, but a lot of white and Black activists took part into it, and things has moved on. I went in to talk about this because I want people to realize that while the primary victim of racism is us, Black people, but it affects other people. We fight, but we on our own cannot defeat the evil of racism. We need comrades and fighters along the line from other people. And if it was possible 40 years ago to galvanize support from the white trade unionist and the Black community's fight against racism, it should still be possible. And what is happening now, it is obvious what is happening in the Black Lives Matter campaign. You also realize how far have we traveled? Have we changed everything? Of course not, we have not changed everything. A lot more could be achieved. But we who has made a lifelong commitment to fight racism, we sometimes feel life is slightly better, is that we probably get a little more sympathetic hearing when we speak about racism. Many of the fellow travelers who had fought along with me, along with many other anti-deportation campaigns, have changed. I would say sometimes for the better. You have recently, I don't know whether you knew it, a couple of months ago in Glasgow, where a deportation van tried to pick up 2 people early in the morning for deportation. The ordinary people in the streets managed to stop the van and get those 2 people out. And that was the direct action which was possible now. I hope more people can take such action, direct action, because at the end, that's what the racists understand. They don't understand sweet talks, nice talks. They understand direct action. And I hope people are encouraged by what has happened in Glasgow. We shall continue to fight. Thank you.
Okay. If you can all unmute, please, and congratulate Mohammed on his long but very detailed contribution tonight. Okay. Thank you, Mohammed. Our next and final speaker tonight will be Ken Macaria, who works for the Bristol Refugee Campaign. Ken?
Good evening, everyone. I had my, hold on, let me open my speech here. So, oh, hold on, I had my speech right. I'll get it on. I had my speech, but something else has opened. Anyway, I'll just speak from my head. I've lost the connection, which I had set up to copy. So my name is Kenneth Macharia. I am chair of board of trustees of Bristol Refugee Rights. Some of you may know a bit about me from a campaign that was hosted by rugby teammates, the Bristol Bisons, when the Home Office attempted to deport me from the UK. My teammates rallied me and to national campaign, and luckily I'm still here. But today I want to talk more about what different organizations in Bristol and what they have done to support people like myself. One of the organizations I would like to start talking about is Bristol Refugee Rights. It is a charity in Bristol that supports asylum seekers and refugees. There are a number of services that take place at Bristol Refugee Rights. Before lockdown, we used to run what is called a welcome center. It was a hive of activities, and we had a hall in which there was a free shop. People could get clothes for free. There was food, there was games, Scrabble, and the organization also ran English classes. And there was someone who would come and help new members register with a GP. There's an organization called the Haven that helps people kind of sort out their medical help. And the reason I volunteered there when I was stopped from doing work is because I had been advised that helping others will make me feel good about myself, and keeping busy is also very good for my mental health. So being in that organization, being in a hive of activity was extremely good for my mental health. And Bristol Refugee Rights did not work in a vacuum on its own. There were other organizations in which we interact with. An example is the Bristol Bike Project. And this is someone who saw that people are struggling with their transport needs. They get very little money and they have to walk long distances. And the person was a keen cyclist. So he started collecting old bicycles, fixing them and giving them to people. And that's how the Bristol Bike Project started. And then there is another organization called Bristol Hospitality Network. And at times when someone's asylum case is unfairly rejected and they have to submit a new application, in between that time, people do become homeless. And what Bristol Hospitality Network does is connects people with a spare room willing to host someone for that time period when they are homeless. They kind of house people in people's houses, which is a wonderful thing. And which other organizations can I talk to? Yeah, so generally kind of like volunteering and helping people has been a wonderful thing. It gives people an opportunity to connect with people, socialize, feel good, and helping others will help you feel good about yourself. So I would encourage anyone with free time to volunteer with a local charity. Thanks. Oh, you're on mute, Ian.
Oh, I am. Okay. Same mistake again, not to worry. If you could all unmute, please, as I have just done, and thank Ken for his excellent contribution. Okay, big round of applause. Okay. Now, we're going to now where we take questions and answers. Okay. Now, Naeem has pointed out, if you want to raise a question, put your question or application in the chat box, please, and we'll take them each in turn. Okay. Now, do we have any questions for Mohammed, Ken, or Joshua? Okay. Now is your chance.
People can raise their hands to say they want to ask a question.
Okay. Well, the first hand raised is John Tillell. Okay, John.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not ignoring the three speakers because I mean there was so much from each speaker, and actually you know, looking within the thing to see these things are happening is fantastic. But the thing that I wanted to sort of say first of all, though, is this question about, you know, the Home Office and the way that its inefficiency we're talking about. Looking at not just at the Home Office, but the way that across the board, the attitudes, responses to Black Lives Matter, you know, there's been a tremendous surge in support and many things. But what I just want to say is that to me, the evidence is there that this is deliberate in all sorts of ways, in attitudes. It's not just in the area that we've been speaking about, Windrush, but I mean, the whole attitude regarding hearing things that are going on, for instance, let's just say Jamaica, but in any country, we could look at Zimbabwe, others, get the same thing. But they've just been left in difficulty. And one thing that was offered to that Jamaica could do with new roads and things like that. What was offered by the government was a prison. Why did they want a prison? Well, they wanted a prison so they could send people back there and get that off there. So, the motivation is there and it's wide. But on the other hand,
John, we can't hear you.
Well, it's not muted.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm talking about young people. Well, a lot of young parliamentarians are talking and saying, look, we've got to decolonise education. A good start. Well, we've got to decolonise the thinking that is going on and making the sort of things that we're talking about persist. But Rich is saying, yeah, we've made some progress, but that's not the main thing. The good things that are going on that was described in Bristol are incidental. And, we need to pick up things, see things that are going on and bring them into the mainstream so that we get schemes up and down the country that can follow this good practice. So it needs to be done on a wide scheme. Education is one area, but since schools now, I mean, looking at what we've got to do in schools, Scotland and Wales are putting in plans for anti-racist education schemes. We had Sewell report from the British government, which was totally against and in denial of racism and so on, and the effects of colonialization. So that's where we are, and it's got to be a holistic approach to this, not just piecemeal.
Okay, well, thank you, John. Now, who would like to answer that one? Ken, Mohammed, or Joshua? Who would like to take the lead? Joshua?
I can do whichever you prefer, Chair.
Okay.
I don't know. Can you hear me well? I've had some technical difficulties, so I've had
Yeah,
to
we
change.
can hear you quite well.
All right, thank you. I thank you. That it's a really important question. I think that's really accurately surmised the challenges we face. I mean, obviously, I focused on speaking about the Windrush generation tonight, but we could talk about education. We could talk about so many different things when it comes to tackling racism in Britain in the 21st century. I think the crucial factor here is to maintain a productive link between elected representatives and bodies and the grassroots. And I think neither can work function at its peak without the other. An elected representative standing on the right issues is fantastic, but they face challenges and they require the mass mobilization and kind of support. And similarly, a mass movement benefits greatly from tribunes in high political places that can really advance their message. That's what I'd like to say on that. In terms of education, you're absolutely right, and the government's Sewell report I struggle to find the words, really. It's just an awful report. It fails completely to listen to any of the wide-ranging and important pieces of academia on race and racism, and both the lived experience and the mass movements, Black Lives Matter and those that have come before it, and what they tell us. Fortunately, I think that the Sewell report is something both to be challenged and taken seriously, and also something which could be easily argued is an act of desperation from the government. It doesn't seem to me that we've heard too much about it since its launch. I know that the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, has tried hard to promote it as a new way of thinking, but I think that it hasn't gained much traction in that. And I think that's something to be both celebrated and not taken for granted. That's something that we have to continue to recommit to.
Okay, thanking Joshua. Mohammed, yes.
Yeah, just two things. What I want to say, Windrush compensation scheme, is the who did wrong them? Home Office. Who is operating the compensation scheme? Home Office. How on earth is that happening? That should not be Home Office's business. They are a guilty party in this, and yet they are operating the compensation scheme. It should be taken out of their hand and is given to an independent body set up to implement it. That's the first point on the Windrush generation. On John Tyrrell's point, I totally agree. Is that we have to decolonize the education system in our country. Well, John was a teacher all his life, so he knows more than I do. But what I know of the history, when I read some of the history.
Idris, you're frozen.
Is the question is the will of actually teaching our history to us, which has been written by us, and there is no we know what our history is, and there are capable people who has articulated our argument and written those histories, and it just include those books in our curriculum. That's as simple.
Thank you, Mohammed. Ken, would you like to reply?
I think the two speakers have replied it extensively.
Okay. Thank you anyway. Okay. Can we now take the question? If you raise your hand, please, in the participants box, or if you switch on your videos, I see a raised hand. You can take a further question. Okay. Anyone like to raise a question? Or have the three speakers done a very good job? And okay.
Ian, I would like to pick up on, while you're waiting for another question, perhaps while people are thinking of questions, I just want to add one more point that was made, if that's all right. It was Mohammed mentioned that about decolonizing education. I think it's really important that that is something that we push for. I definitely think that Black British history is something that we're severely lacking, and I'm sure most of you don't follow the parliamentary proceedings like I do, obviously, but I'm really grateful that the member for Streatham today has managed to secure debates in Parliament on Black History Month, and really, I know that when combined with the grassroots campaign, this is some area that we can really make progress on. But I would also say that we should also be vigilant for the way that the government is challenging Black academia in UK universities. I'm aware of strike action from the UEL in areas like the University of East London and Goldsmiths University. And a lot of that centres around cuts to social sciences and targets senior Black academics. So I think that it's important that we are proud of the Black history that we have, Black British history that we have, and the materials there. That I think part of the government's current culture war strategy is certainly to close down those avenues.
Any further questions?
Okay, Ian, while we're waiting, I've got a question to somebody sent me a question directly. Is asking what top 3 things do trade unions need to do to fight the border state, whether that's against detention, deportation, or the wild anti-refugee policies the Home Office is thinking of.
Mohammed, yeah, go on.
Yes, sorry, Naim, did you read it out?
Yeah.
Okay, can you read it out again, please?
Yeah. What top 3 things do trade unions need to do to fight the border state, whether that's against detention, deportation, or the vile anti-refugee policies the Home Office is thinking of?
Well, if you allow me to say that, it's all 3 of them, and actually more than that. You know, fight against detention in limited sense. We had made some inroad in, you remember this notorious detention center in Oxford. I forgot the name of this detention center. But we used to regularly demonstrate outside this detention center for years and years. Campsfield Detention Center. And that has finally closed down. And there have been other detention centers. The good thing about detention center, because it has got a physical presence. And if you really target certain detention center, it is possible to make them feel very vulnerable, because like it or not, those things are now run by private agencies. They're not run by government. So they're susceptible to public pressure more than, unfortunately, more than the government is. And it is possible. Stop deportation, of course, that is the first priority, because it is no good fighting for the right of refugees and immigrants if we let them to be deported in the first place. So it's the sharp end of the fight that we must do that. And of course, wider refugee policies. I don't have to add anything, because the way this government treats the refugees, that has to be constantly protested against. The latest thing they're doing is about this channel crossing. They will rather have people drowned in the channel and die there than allow people to rescue them. RNLI is not a revolutionary organization. Even this government has not even convinced RNLI not to rescue the refugees from the channel. Who else can they convince? It is our duty. Trade union has got its limitations. It is not all powerful, as some people might think, but a little bit of contribution towards all 3 fights will do us world of good.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Ken, would you like to reply?
Oh, yeah, I chose a few points which I could think of. One of which is trade unions have a big influence on voting patterns. So by supporting good policies or supporting campaigners with good policies could kind of have a big influence on the national policy, but kind of that is a while since the next general election. The other thing that can happen a bit closer in time is supporting charities that support people. The asylum process can take quite a long time for people to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and supporting people in this enables them to complete their fight. So supporting charities that support people is a way, and not only through money, through time. If you have free time, volunteering at charities that support people is another way. And the last one is raising awareness just about the situation and what's going on. Yeah, that's yeah.
Okay, Thank you, Ken. Okay, we had another question on the chat line. The first one is, what do trade unions need to do to fight the border state? Whether that's against detention, deportation, or the vile anti-refugee policies of the Home Office. Is
I think
thinking.
that's been answered.
That's the question we answered.
Okay, that's been answered, okay, that's fair enough. Yeah. Second question that's coming on the chat line is, research suggests that lots of trade union members are voting for the Tories. Okay, is it a class solidarity problem when it comes to supporting migrant rights? And how do we resolve it if there is? Okay, that's the second question. Research suggests that lots of trade union members are voting for Tories. Is there a class solidarity problem when it comes to supporting migrant rights? And how do we resolve it if there is? Okay. Now, Joshua, would you like to kick off on that one?
Yeah, okay. So I think there are two things here. Firstly, I would say that it has always been the case to some degree that not all trade union members vote for the Labour Party and some are Conservatives. And that's something that we have to reckon with. Now, that being said, it is clearly not something that we can just accept as a fact of life and just say, well, some of them are going to vote Tory and so on, as I have just said. It's something that we clearly have to challenge. It's difficult to know it, and I don't think there is a magic bullet with this, but I think that platforming refugees, I think that bringing the voices of undocumented migrants, bringing their faces, bringing their whole personhood into the conversation is such an important and integral part of how we fight this narrative. Because I think the idea that the demonization of such groups is much easier to do when they are just a statistic on a page or black and white ink in a newspaper piece. But I'm sure Mohammed and others will be able to concur that once you meet someone, if you really meet someone, a refugee, a migrant, someone for deportation, and you are then charged with telling them to their face that, all this stuff, I think that it becomes much more difficult. And I think it's much easier to build solidarity with that. And that is a real challenge. It requires us to have infrastructure to be able to do that. It requires us to have reach. We have to be able to reach people who would previously not be interested in hearing our ideas and might initially be not be very willing or not feel very comfortable meeting a migrant or a refugee, especially someone who has those sentiments. Trade unions are really kind of important battleground in that, just to kind of tie this into the last question, because I think the trade union workplace is an opportunity, a workplace is an opportunity where you meet people who aren't necessarily immediately quite politically close to you. It's an opportunity to meet people who vote Tory. Maybe you don't, when we don't vote Tory. It's an opportunity to meet people from different walks of life who you just happen to share a workplace with. So I think that, in conclusion, I think that bringing the migrant, the undocumented person, the refugee, bringing their face, bringing their real story is a really powerful thing. It's something that right-wing media tends not to do. They don't like to do that because it's a fundamental element of human nature to sympathize with another person. It's much easier to hate a number or a statistic or a warped headline.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. Mohammed?
What can I say? I have seen in my lifetime, you have seen it, some trade union members do vote Tories, and they do. That's the fact of life. But we as Black people come here as workers. That's our identity. Like it or not, we have to work here to earn our living. by virtue of that, we're a member of trade union. And it is our duty that we play our part within this trade union, because end of the day, you know, this is my opinion, my lived experience, that you may have a good friend in a Tory voting friend, but he's never going to be your comrade. He's not going to stand up and fight with you. So if we are going to find a comrade to fight beside me, it's going to come from the rank of the trade union. So unfortunately, one or two members of the trade union might be voting Tories. We can accept that, but still work with the majority of the people. And because simply I don't see, simply I think that rank and file trade unionists, the activists, they're the one who we can influence. They're the one likely to listen to us. And we have to continue doing it.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, Ken? No. Okay.
Have anything to add?
Okay, that's fair enough. You're not okay. We have a third and final question. Third and final question is: the trade union movement's parliamentary intervention is supposedly the Labour Party. Do you believe that enough is being done by trade unions and the wider left to ensure that the Labour government will address the border violence? Okay. Yeah. Joshua?
Okay. It's an open question, isn't it? And with our recent experience, you know, Labour trade union movement, I'm always very careful to distinguish between the Labour movement and the Labour Party. And it has always, you know, some of my comrade in 80s used to have a slogan, Labour and Tory, both the same, both play racist game. But that actually meant the Parliamentary Labour Party, not the Labour movement. And in recent experience with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and the dirty tricks played against him by not only his opponents, but his supposedly his own comrades within the Labour Party, made sure that he did not get elected. And that is where we are. You know, I don't think enough has been done. There is never enough has been done to fight the evil of racism and many other injustices in our society. But I'm realistic. I don't expect the current Labour Party leadership, if they form a government in the next 5 years, 6 years, whatever time the election is, I don't expect them to change much more than what the Tories are doing now, as far as the immigration asylum policy is concerned. But that is not to say that we should stop there. That is not our fate. That is what I always say. They do whatever they do. We don't accept that as our fate. We will have to fight our fight.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Ken?
Not quite. Certainly, I'll leave it to Joshua to respond.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Joshua?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I think one comment that is often leveled, at the Labour leadership is that nobody knows what they stand for, and it can be I think this is something to kind of bring up. It does feel to me that I really don't know. Sometimes Keir Starmer seems to me a leader searching for a political vision, and I think that's something that right across the political spectrum is being felt. And it's hard to know what Keir Starmer really would do in that position for certain. But I would personally say that I'm not as confident with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister than I would be if Jeremy Corbyn was Prime Minister about making sweeping and radical changes to end the border state. I definitely think that the Labour Party has taken a step back in that way. I would like to see more from the Labour front bench on this. In terms of how that affects, I think one of the most striking examples of how we can put pressure on the Labour leadership was the Black Lives Matter movement that we saw. I think we really saw the Labour Party put in a position where it was asked to nail its colours to the mast. And I think that even if that might not quite have, we might not have the most anti-racist revolutionary Labour Party that there has ever been after that movement, I certainly think it showed a kind of a glimpse where a mass street movement can certainly push a centre-left party, left-wing party, to affirm some of those principles. And I also think that movement was a real demonstration to the political class that something that they long thought was a fringe issue that only a small number of voters cared about, which was anti-racism and anti-deportation, that there was actually a potential, if it didn't already exist, for a mass popular base for anti-racist policies. I think that's a really exciting thing that has to be mobilized, and that has to be shoved in the Labour leadership's face so that it sees that this is something that matters to its voters. And when it sees that, it will respond accordingly. I mean, political parties, partly their policies stem from the personal convictions of the people in charge, but it's also true that their political manifestos, their political programs are developed in response to what they think the voters, their voters and the wider voters want. So I think that if we're unsure or unable to read the political convictions of Keir Starmer and the Labour front bench, then we just need to double down on bringing our mass movement, our anti-racist movement, to everyone's attention, to make it so loud that it can't be missed, to force the Labour Party to reckon with such a movement.
Okay, thanking Joshua. Now, if we can thank Joshua, Ken and Mohammed for their contributions tonight. Big round of applause, please. Now, for the final comments tonight, can I welcome Mohammed Mumit, who's on the Executive Committee of the Birmingham Trades Union Council, and helped to organise tonight's meeting. Mohammed Mumit.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, everyone. Sorry, my camera's off again, having loads of technical difficulties. I'm the Equalities Officer of Birmingham Trades Union Council. We've been organising these events tonight and the last one. I want to thank all the speakers for coming and giving an excellent view of what has historically happened in Birmingham, what is needed to happen, what is happening in the Labour Party, in our trade unions, the failures within our trade union movement, our labour movement, as well as the successes that need to take place right now. It has been a very, very interesting event. What I only want to add is a little bit on our racist state and where we need to go. Patrick Wolf, who's the founder of Settler Colonialities, discussed the idea of racial regimes, identifying the violence of the state to understand what racism is. If we apply that to the domestic regime, it is undeniably the border. The border not only allows physical violence towards people, detention, deportation, imbalanced power towards employers and landlords, unavailability of healthcare. Even parents were being asked a few years ago, actually, whether their children are migrants. The border allows this form of violence to become part of the state, and migrants are easy to demonize to justify it. But it's important to also remember that this becomes, that physical violence becomes police violence, that detention becomes incarceration, deportation becomes violent extradition to torture. All of these things, surveillance erodes civil liberties. It's really important to understand that the racist violence of the state is later justified to the rest of the working class, to recognize that it's only a way in which those that are powerful are more centered in taking power. So their demonization and state violence that is racist is eventually just part of state violence towards the entire working class. And we've seen this with the Prevent agenda. We've seen this with rising police powers. We've seen this with the new announcement of 20,000 new prisons. The violent border system doesn't prevent migrants from coming, it just makes their situation more precarious. So when we talk about 0 hours contract today, fire and rehire, etc., all of these things were what precarious migrants were already facing for decades. When we talk about healthcare disappearing, housing and the power of landlords today, particularly over young people, all of these things already existed around precarious migrants. The border state violence is the justification of the racist state violence, is the justification of the class state violence. And I'll just close on this point, that what this reminds me of is the late Joe Cox, who was murdered by a neo-Nazi fascist. And the thing that she said was, there's more that unites us than that which divides us. And what unites us is the violence of the ruling class against the working class, because that is the violence, the racist violence and the border violence. And so there is no working class without the migrant working class. And that is the message and the facts that we need to put on the ground as a trade union movement and build that coalition that takes on the ruling class. Thank you so much for attending tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Mohammed.
Okay.
Oh, it's recording again.
Yeah, it's